Fast Lawyer VR Reviews. For sexy VR reviews, hit the subscribe button. Today we're reviewing Borderlands 2 VR. This is a game that I've been playing for quite a while because I wanted to give you the definitive review for Borderlands 2 VR. And I played this game for almost 44 hours to bring you this review, so I hope you enjoy it. Now, Borderlands 2 VR originally released on the Steam store October 22nd, 2019 by developer Gearbox Software and publisher 2K. It officially supports the Valve Index HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift. It normally retails for $50. It's currently on a 60% off sale, only $20, which is a pretty good deal for just the amount of sheer content that you're getting in this game. And I paid a little over $33 about a year or so ago. I don't really remember when. Now, this game is obviously a port of the very beloved Borderlands 2 game. And this is pretty much a one-to-one port of the game. Now, there are some changes. Probably the biggest change is the BAMF bullet time mechanic. So, you may not know this. I don't know if a lot of people actually know this. But in VR, there's a special mechanic called BAMF, which stands for Badass Mega Fun Time. And this is basically a slow time mechanic, not only so you can do extra damage and target several enemies with time slowed down, but it lets you dodge bullets, dodge damage. So it gives you a little bit of an advantage in VR. The other thing that a lot of people may not realize is that this does include all the DLC from Borderlands 2. From the BAMF DLC pack, you do have to make sure you download it on your Steam DLC manager. And it includes Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, and also Captain Scarlet and her pirate's booty. Yes, I did have fun saying that. And if you only have time to do one DLC pack, make sure you do Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon's Keep. It is a love letter to tabletop RPGs. And another thing that some people may not realize about this VR port is that online multiplayer co-op is not supported. I know that was a really bad decision by Gearbox Interactive. I don't know what they were thinking when they made this VR port and failed to support online co-op, which is one of the best aspects of the Borderlands experience. It's really mind-boggling that they did not support online multiplayer co-op so that you can have fun with your VR friends online. I think if they had supported online co-op, this game would have been more popular, but I think one of the reasons why this game has mixed reviews on the Steam store is this one singular decision, whether it was the publisher or the developer, 2K or Gearbox, whatever the case may be. It was a serious misstep and really a slap to the face to VR users. Now, I'm still going to recommend this game, and it's still one of the best VR experiences out there, but it could have been so much better. It could have been much, much better. And what we got was really a mediocre port to a great game. Now, because VR is in a very precarious position currently, where we really don't know what the future of VR holds currently. Valve has kind of stepped away from VR, and we're still waiting for them to release Deckard. Will they release Deckard? Will they release a new VR game? We keep waiting for Citadel. Are they going to release it? Yes or no? The Steam store has really lost a lot of the VR market to Meta, and Meta is currently facing a lot of financial difficulty. So it's going to be interesting to see where VR is in another year or so and see who takes the lead in VR with a headset that's standard, with a store that's healthy for developers. So right now, what all that means is that we don't have that many good VR shooters. There's not a whole lot of good FPS games in VR. So, in effect, Borderlands 2 VR, released back in 2019, is still one of the best VR experiences you can get, but it's very flawed. It's very flawed. Borderlands 2 is running on a modified Unreal Engine. On my RTX 3080, I was getting mostly 90 frames per second. Now, there's not as many graphical options as I would have liked, especially from a AAA developer. Now, there was such things as texture detail, draw distance, and anti-aliasing, but you would expect to see more graphical options than are available here. And quite frankly, given the art style, given how old this game is, I would expect this game to run well on older GPUs, but that's just not the case. I have heard of several people having optimization issues. So while if you have like an RTX 3080, you should not experience those problems. If even like on a 1080, I've heard people having issues in this game. That shouldn't just not be the case, because again, this is a pretty old game with a cell shaded art style that just shouldn't have problems in VR. So this game was never optimized properly. But the good news is, if you do have a more modern GPU, you should not really have any optimization or performance issues. And the game does look good in VR, but it doesn't look great. Obviously, after Half-Life Alyx, the game visuals here are a bit dated. However, if you're a fan of the Borderlands series, it is a lot of fun to be inside these vast worlds with different layouts, different landscapes, all these different types of enemies, all the different weapons, and each weapon does have a different feel. Shotguns will have a huge spread but slow bullet travel time and not a big range. The sniper rifle will have a very fast bullet speed, but obviously you'll have limited ammo. You'll usually have a slow reload. You do really have to make every bullet count with a sniper rifle. Handguns are pretty easy to use, but again, you have a small magazine size, but you have a quick reload. SMGs have a big spread, but they're quick to reload, and they are one of the most fun to use in VR, along with the assault rifle. So there are so many different types of guns with all kinds of different effects. If I spent time talking about all the different weapons you can get here, I would spend a lot of time. But I will say you have guns that will slow you down, guns that will talk back to you, guns that have bullets bouncing everywhere, and you have all kinds of elemental effects, and it just brings the whole package here to make this a very fun looter shooter. And you have so many different enemy types, and that is Borderlands 2 VR at its magical best. It's a fun looter shooter. You have so many different types of weapons, and some of them are just crazy to use, and you also have a crazy amount, a crazy variety of enemies, from mini bosses to boss fights to crazy mechanics. You just don't know what to expect when you go from one level to the next, and you do travel Pandora all across the map when you get different landscapes, different verticalities, whole lot of secrets to find out, and just some crazy quests to go on. And on top of that, you just have some very memorable characters, some of the most memorable characters in gaming history, including Jack, Claptrap, Tiny Tina, Moxie, Roland. The list just goes on and on. So obviously Borderlands 2, the game, is great, but the VR port, not so much. So what's wrong? Why is this a mixed review status? Well, like I said, one of the big things is the lack of online multiplayer co-op support. But besides that, the controls just aren't the best. The VR implementation is not so good either. So it just takes a while to get used to these controls. Now, if you do spend time in this game, you actually do get used to the controls, and you find out that the controls maybe are a little bad at first, but once you get used to them, they're not so bad. And the more I played this game, the more I grew to, I'm not going to say think the controls were great, but to think, you know, the controls are okay. They weren't a detriment to the experience once you get used to the controls. So the weirdest thing is that you're aiming with your left or your offhand trigger. And I think that's something that's very off-putting at first. And it's hard to describe, but basically just imagine that your gun is on your main hand, your right hand, okay? And you're holding that. And you press right trigger to shoot. Now, if you just shoot like that, you're hip firing, and your firing will be very inaccurate. So what you have to do is you have to push left trigger. Now what this does is that it slows you down, and you're gonna walk very slow, but your accuracy increases a lot. Now if you have a scope weapon, what it'll do is you'll have a screen in front of you, and you can target on the enemy to be a lot more accurate as well. Now this seems very odd at first, but once you spend at least 10 hours in this game, it'll be like something natural, something normal. It just feels very odd at first. Now this game does have all the locomotion, all the turning, all the comfort options that you have been accustomed to in VR. So there is teleportation, there is full locomotion, there is smooth and snap turning, and there's all kind of blinder options for you that get motion sickness in VR. On top of that, you can change the grip angle on your gun, and that is located in the comfort option settings. Now this game worked perfectly for me on the MetaQuest 2 using link cable, but I have heard of people complaining about the gun angle. Again, you can change that in the comfort settings, and I have not experienced any issues. Some people also mentioned issues with the HUD. I had no problems with the HUD, but keep in mind you can turn it off, you can change it. There are settings for that in the settings. So almost any option you can think of, there is a setting here for that. What you would expect from a AAA developer, but the only thing that was not there was more graphic settings. I was really surprised by the graphic settings here, that there just weren't as many as there should be. Now I do have the walk speed here set to the highest possible, and the walk speed is alright. You know, I am a VR veteran, so the walk speed feels natural. You're not walking too slow, and I don't think you're going too fast either. The problem is that you can't really sprint, unlike Borderlands 2. However, to make up for that, you do have the BAMF ability. Again, it's like a bullet time. And to be honest, this BAMF ability is definitely a bit overpowered, and it is on a short cooldown. So I used it very often, and it really does help you not only increase your damage, but also avoid damage if things get a little bit too close to the edge. Another thing that feels unnatural in VR is the driving. Unfortunately, you're not grabbing onto the steering wheel. Instead, you're using your joystick to throttle and to turn, and it just doesn't feel very good. And then to shoot, you're kind of using like a head gaze mechanic. Again, I wish developers wouldn't do this. So unfortunately, the driving just never really feels good. And a lot of the interactions here are just not very immersive. A lot of the interactions are point and click. You know, all the looting, you just basically have a laser sticking out of your hand and you just click and click and click and you'll be looting lots of stuff. The melee here is not very good. You just basically do a basic hand motion and it's very weird. You just kind of put your hand forward, wave your hand forward, and it'll create the melee punches here. Again, the melee here works. I put it to low sensitivity so that way it would always register correctly, but it never felt good. So the melee here doesn't really feel good, and I try to avoid it as much as possible. And unfortunately, you have the same problems with the UI when you're using your menus or when you're using your inventory. You basically have a laser sticking out of your offhand and you're selecting between these menus, and it's just not very smooth or polished. It feels very clunky, and it's just not a good inventory system or a good menu UI selection system. It works, it's functional, but it's just not a polished or immersive experience. One thing that I should have mentioned earlier is the crosshair. Now, I had the crosshair off just because I don't like using a crosshair in VR, but for those that do use it, I have heard that it's offset, and I think mine was offset too, but I turned it off so early that I just think I forgot about it. But definitely don't use a crosshair. This is VR. You don't use crosshairs in VR. So that really is not a big deal for me because you should not be using crosshairs in VR. Aiming down sights does work perfectly fine. Keep in mind, a lot of the guns that aren't very good have a lot of bullet spread. So they're not going to shoot accurately, but that's a game mechanic. Obviously, scope weapons should fire accurately, especially if you're using like a sniper rifle, but you can't expect your SMG to shoot straight. It's not going to shoot a straight bullet, and that is a game mechanic. That's just part of the fun of Borderlands 2. The one major bug that I did run into is that sometimes enemies would stay frozen in place, and that would make them easy kills. Now, this did not happen very often. I think it happened 2 or 3 times during my 44 hours of gameplay, but it did happen and I thought I should mention it for this review. Now there's a few more game mechanics I do want to mention. One of them is switching weapons. So you can do a button press and you'll cycle through your weapons, but there's also a weapon wheel where you can select the weapon that you want to use. And for grenades, it's just a button press and it'll go in the general direction you're facing. Keep in mind, grenades have all types of different effects, so they're not always going to go straight. Sometimes they'll be attracted to enemies, sometimes they'll gravitational pull enemies in. There's lots of different effects with grenades. It's pretty much arcade action here. So I think I covered everything that I can think of. There's really a lot more to this game. It is a huge game and you can spend 100 hours in this world. I did enjoy it. It is one of the best VR experiences. I think I would put it in my top 50 VR games, but the VR port is actually pretty poor. And if I have to rate it, I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. The game itself is great. It's the VR port that's really lacking. Anyways, I'm Fast Lawyer. This has been my full review for Borderlands 2 VR. If you enjoyed my review, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, have a wonderful day. Goodbye.